Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see so many people from all the different places. Welcome to World Usability Day. We're here for a different celebration this year. So last year we've been lucky to receive a lot of people in our offices, in OutSystems offices in Lisbon. But this year, well, the celebrations are a little different, yeah. But it's a different stage. Let's make it fun. Let's make it relaxed and enjoy ourselves. So I'm going to start by introducing your hosts. I am Silvia Sequeira. So I lead the UX UI team here at OutSystems, a global team. And with me today is Juliana.
Hello, everyone.
And Sergio, also with me, not in the same room, but you may see him here also. So, Juliana.
So, hello all. I'm Juliana Cialini. I am a UX UI designer working with Silvia, helping our customers from all over the world to design applications with the OutSystems platform.
And then Sergio, are you there?
Hey, yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Hello all, I'm Sergio Miguel. I used to work with Sylvia and Juliana at OutSystems. I was the one that bugged Sylvia for a long time to host an event like this. And as you can see, last year was a great success. This year we wanted, although in difficult conditions, but we wanted to do something and get everybody together. And we want to make this tradition, and we hope next year we can do a huge party together and be in a nice event.
Yeah, let's try to do that, and this hopefully is a good tradition to keep. So let's see what happens today. We'll have two talks, okay? One about UX metrics and then another about cognitive design. And in between, we'll have two QA moments also. You can do, all participants can pose questions in two different ways, or you use Zoom section for Q&A, and you can be hearing the talk and then posing the question at the same time. And then in the end, I will read out loud your question, okay? Or you can wait for the end of the session and really just raise hands, also here in Zoom, and you have the chance to make your question directly to the speaker. Okay, so this is it from my part. Juliana, do you want to make the honors of presenting the first speakers?
Sure. So let's go with the first speakers. They are Paulo Costa, Product Manager at OutSystems, and Hernani Alves, Senior Product Designer at Talkdesk. They both carried out some important research here at OutSystems around defining the right UX metrics and monitoring results. They will be showing you what you need to consider in that journey for that data-driven design. Paulo?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Juliana.
You are welcome.
I believe I can start sharing my screen and use the most common sentence in 2020, which is, can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So, yeah, as Juliana said, first of all, hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm a product manager at OutSystems, but I'm not actually working in an area which is something you'd expect in a designers conference, or at least with the attendees that we have here today, because I went through LinkedIn and I saw the list of attendees and I saw, wow, so many product designers, UX researchers, all over the place, people connected with design. And here I am, a product manager for the CI/CD pipeline, the DevOps area. So this is a different, unusual, I'd say, approach to a metrics lab regarding UX. And I thought, well, I need to break the ice with all these designers. So what should be the first topic of conversation, something that they really enjoy? And I thought quantum mechanics, hardcore science. And if you think I'm joking, well, I'm not. This is the first thing I wanted to show you. This is called the Schrödinger equation. This is an equation that was postulated, formulated in something like 1925 or 26, who's counting, right? It was by an Austrian-Irish fellow named Schrödinger. And basically this equation, I'm not going to in the details of what's there on the right side of the screen because that really doesn't matter to you. But this equation brings something important for the conversation that we're going to go and have ahead, which is this was the first mathematical approach to something that says, I want to describe the state of a system evolving with time. And what exactly is describing the state of a system evolving in time? Well, this is something abstract, but it became quite popular through popular science with this image and this thought experiment that was done by this fellow, Schrödinger, around 10 years after postulating its formula. And it did it because there were a lot of interpretations around this postulate that he really didn't agree with. There was a lot of abstraction and a lot of disconnection from the real world. And basically there was one specific interpretation which was called Copenhagen interpretation. And this one said that, well, at a given time, a state, at that time they were talking about atoms. It could be spinning up and spinning down at the same time. Translated this into real world, it's the same thing as saying I'm running on a road and I'm running left and right at the same time. That doesn't happen in the real world. While theoretically this makes a lot of sense, and through the decades there's been a lot of research saying this is quite possible on a theoretical level, in the real world you cannot say that you're running right and left at the same time, that an atom is spinning up and down at the same time. This was what Schrödinger thought. So he made this experiment where he said, okay, I place a cat inside a box. And this cat lives in the box and it has an atom, which is a radioactive substance there, and it throws radiation into the air, and there's a counter there. And if the radiation goes above a certain threshold, there's a hammer that drops into a poison bottle and kills the cat. Kind of a troubled mind to come up with this kind of experiment. We all agree with that, but it created a very visual representation of this. And by the way, he created this when he was talking and having discussions with Einstein and its peers. I don't know the name of the other peers. Einstein is the only one that matters because everyone knows Einstein and it so validates all this theory. But so he made this point, and it became quite reasonable for everyone that at some point in time, you look at the box and you see the cat is either dead or alive, not dead and alive. Theoretically, it can be in both states, but when you observe it, then you have one particular state and you're able to react according to it. So if you're looking at the cat and the cat is dead, well, you start burying him. If the cat is alive, you celebrate, you either prepare a meal, or if the cat has inhaled a lot of radioactive substances and has 3 ears and 3 eyes, you close the box and hope it never gets out of there again. So you're able to react according to the observation you just did. Now, why is this important to all of you out there that are designers and UX researchers? If we make a fast forward, 100 years, almost 100 years after this experiment was done, this is basically the first principle for one of the hottest topics in the IT world right now, which is observability. Observability, and by Honeycomb's definition, Honeycomb is a company that is quite a big authority in terms of the observability thread. They have this very good definition in their website, which is observability means you can answer any questions about what's happening on the inside of the system just by observing the outside of the system. So you want to know if the cat is dead or alive, just look at the box. Same principle. Observe at a certain point and you'll understand how it is. And you don't need to interact with the cat because just like they're saying, you don't need to ship new code to answer new questions. So you basically look at the cat and you understand how the cat is. It's not just knowing if it's dead or alive. It's knowing if it's acting well, if it's good enough to eat or to do something else. So it's understanding the state of the thing so you can properly react to. Now, where I'm going with this is who uses observability as a daily task or a daily principle of their job? Your friends, the DevOps teams. So the DevOps teams, which are still not the ones you're expecting to work with daily. Like, why am I talking about DevOps in a World Usability Day conference? Well, the DevOps teams rule themselves by, or measure themselves, their productivity and their efficiency by 4 big metrics. These 4 big metrics are not defined by chance, they are defined by Google, and they are measured every year in a DevOps state of the art report. They measure how the IT world is acting regarding with these metrics. Are the IT teams actually developing well with quality fast enough? Are the DevOps team really working as expected? And these are the metrics that they have a scale from low to elite. I'm just going to focus on the elite teams. If you want to be an elite software delivery performer, you need to do 4 things. First, you need to deploy at least once a day, multiple times per day, more than once a day, to production. That's one of the measures. Then you need to have lead time for changes in less than 1 day. What this means is from code commit to code being running in production, so the application being changed, less than 1 day. Time to restore service, if you have a bug, if you need to fix something, less than 1 hour. Change failure rate. Now this is where the things start to get interesting. This means what percentage of changes that reach production cause service degradation. Less than 15% is the goal here to be an elite performer. So if a team that does all of this, so the business loves it, right? They'll reach all business goals because someone has an idea, less than 1 day, it's up and running, never fails, never needs to restore the service. All is fine, all is well in the world. Well, not so fast. This is where I want to make a case in point here about these metrics and how something is still needed to do, and it's up to you to work in here. Let's make a use case around a bank that has a mobile app, fresh new mobile app. Everyone loves and everyone uses the app. 20% of the global usage of all channels of this bank are tunneled through the mobile app. And everyone in that app makes a transaction, makes a transfer from one account to other people. Everyone sends money with the mobile app. So those 20% have a funnel conversion of 100%. This means the business that relies on commissions over the transactions, the business is extremely happy with the mobile app. And now they're not so happy with their website. It's an old website. It's hard. It's cumbersome to do a transfer there. So what happens is the PM goes to the devs team and says, you know what, guys, we love the mobile app, but we're having issues with the other one. Just about half the people using the website actually do a transaction. So they spend a lot of time there doing nothing. They don't bring us money with that. So can you make look and feel, act in the website like it does on the mobile app? So it's easy, so that people like to use it. So it increases our funnel. This is our business goal. We want to make more money out of our website. And the developers, they look at it and they say, well, kind of easy on my side. I just convert this mobile app into a progressive web app, and it acts all the same at all interfaces, that all channels. So the website will look just like the web app. It does the same thing. Transactions are easy. Cool. Everyone loves it. There's one guy on the operations side that says, well, I just want to make sure that we switch. So the old website gets down, the new website with the mobile app is up. That's about it. And the other guy from the ops team says, I'll just ensure the tests run like they always did for the mobile app, because it's the same code. It's just being distributed differently. So I want to show you how the mobile app works. And just notice this. This is a mocking app. This is not a real app, okay? I'm using this just to exaggerate on the point and make it extremely obvious, the problems that we're going to face. So in a mobile app, I just click on transfer, I select the account of origin, I select to which destination I want to send money, I type the amount of money, I click next, input my fingerprints, so it's validated, summary page, yep, that's it. I drag the slider to confirm, so human interaction here, awesome, and there you go. Like 20 seconds, the transaction is made, no effort at all, no friction at all from the user, business loves this. So they just converted this to the website. So let's see how it works on the website. And here I'll have sound so you can hear the clicks. This was actually me doing this experiment. So going to the account, the transfer screen, selecting the origin account. Well, the interface is kind of weird, right? It's kind of stretched. This doesn't look good, but at least it allows me to do everything. I'm typing the amount, perfectly fine. I'm going to click next. Cool. Wait, a pin here in the website? Well, that's weird. And now, yeah, I want to do this. I want to transfer. And here's the problem. What worked perfectly fine on the mobile app doesn't necessarily work when you're not using a touch interface. So what happens is that I bounced back to the home page and, well, no transaction, no conversion on the funnel. And the very next day, I got an angry PM telling the developer team, what the hell have you done? Because I don't know what did you do, but the funnel there, it's a mess. I mean, only 20% of all global users make a transaction. This is way below the 50 to 60% we had before. And this 20% from the analytics I'm getting, it's just a mobile app doing the 20% of users of the mobile app doing the transaction. So nobody else is doing transactions. What the hell is happening with the web app? And at this point, the business is very angry and everyone gets fired. Well, it's exaggeration, I know, but what really happens is that the developer team says, from my metrics, I didn't need to put any code out there. So all I did was a conversion and publish. It took less than 1 day. This metric is perfectly fine. And then there's a different thing here, which is, remember this metric, the change failure rate? This said, if a system, something reaches production and causes service degradation, it's called a failure. Now, what the developer team will tell you, and they will be right to tell you, is that we didn't introduce any new code here. So this change didn't fail. What failed was something else. At this point, I'm pretty sure, I believe we have like 350 people watching, right? Most of you will be saying, it's kind of obvious, right? Just, there was no testing involved in this. They didn't test in the website, in the desktop. Well, what is extremely obvious to you, let me tell you something, it's not extremely obvious to the outside world yet, okay? It's not. So at OutSystems, what we found out was this change that was promoted, the conversion to the website, is in fact a failure. Now, it's a failure on the business side, but this should be accounted here. And how can we prevent this from happening? The way to prevent this from happening is to observe and use the observability methods right from the bat, right from the moment you start planning your user story. Once you get involved with business and you understand what they need to do is multiple channels. So we need to observe the behavior right from the bat so we can predict how it will happen when I open the box and I understand, is the cat dead or alive? I can predict that now. So what we came up was, there really is a need to embed experience monitoring in everything you do. And if you really want to be an elite software deliverer, you need to start including UX metrics because they are the KPIs for the business metrics, you need to have them in your acceptance criteria. At least in 90% of your user stories, you need to do that. So how can we measure this, when to measure, and what metrics should we go after? This was the moment where I reached out to the UX team and asked, can you help me? So Hernani, let me see if I can send you the ability to remote control this. Remote control to Hernani. Yes. Hernani, the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo, for that. And Paulo, by this time, he reached out to the UX. Sorry. So at this point, Paulo reached out to the UX team where I was at, and sorry, and he reached out to us. At this moment, we were doing a UX metrics lab, and we were trying to connect a lot of dots regarding how you measure experience. We were at the beginning, we were starting at lean UX. We were starting at looking at hypothesis statements, because if you are aware of how lean UX works, we kind of focus on some assumptions and then connect it with quantitative and qualitative data to validate our assumptions. So we were working on that, but then something changed. All of a sudden, we were aware of Jared Spool's persuasive UX metrics frameworks, and that kind of twist everything upside down of our ideas and what we were working on. So the thing that Jared Spool's methodology and framework has is that you should always start with an end goal. And this end goal is something that's now being said in the UX community, UX outcome. So if we do a great job for our users, this is the change that's going to happen in their world. So bear in mind that a metric and a measurement is nothing more than looking at something, so opening the box and seeing and verifying if the state that the things are in. So we can measure that success. We can measure the moment where a change happens and this outcome is all of a sudden true. So the best metaphor that I have for this, so imagine that you have the UX outcome to run a marathon and you want to complete that marathon. The success metric is the moment where you cross the finishing line. That moment where you cross the finishing line, you can say that I completed the marathon. But the step before you cross the finishing line, you haven't done that. So that threshold is what we call the success metric. And that's usually a point in time. It can be more precise or less precise. The precision depends on what you're doing. But what really matters is that you have a way of agreeing and deciding this early on, what is your success point. And also, you shouldn't do it by yourself. This is a collaboration with all of your team. This is the hardest part of metrics. You need to have agreement with everyone. Everyone must know what a success is, because you're going to have a party when you reach this success for your users. So bear in mind that this should be always related with our users, but this is a moment of celebration that we've done our job. And then we can have tiny progress metrics. We can have tiny parties along the way to make sure that we are going in the right direction. So you might see some similarities with this, with a product roadmap, or even on Agile when you are burning the sprint and seeing your velocity. There are some similarities of this, but we are focusing the measurements and the metrics that we are finding out on users and how they are performing in our system. So moving on, another thing that we found out with our research on the UX metrics lab is that the detail of the measurements, they matter. And this is something that it's really important, because not all measures are alike. So in fact, we can look at the usability measurements that we found, that most of you probably are aware of. So we're talking about task completeness, we're talking about time on task, we're talking about, for instance, error rate, and we can connect that with satisfaction. That's a more with sentiment or user experience part. And also we can extrapolate that also into the customer experience with engagement, adoption, and retention, that the measures that usually the business are keeping their eye on in terms of systems, and also how this is going to affect their bottom line. So there's a connection here between the small, the micro level, and this big strategical level. So you can do a traceability from all these measurements that we were able to see, correlate them, and do experiments with this. So you can do like a forecast. You can know by the position of the button or something that's not working at that detail, at that tiny level, that's going to impact your bottom line. And you can also do some experiments in order to change something that's going to happen while you're doing this. So this is really interesting. So you can use it to change the possible future. So imagine that you're opening new realities, new ways of working, and you also can use this as a tool for ROI, for showing the value of usability and UX studies. The best metaphor for this that I can find is that old English poem. I'm not sure if most of you might be aware of. So it's like that thing: for want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of the shoe, the horse was lost. Then the rider was lost. The message was lost. The battle was lost. The war was lost. And then the country was lost. So usability is important because it's going to affect the bottom line of your company, even if you're in a low maturity company that doesn't realize this yet, if you are delivering a product. So another important thing that came out of our studies is this idea of metrics are different. So you have, that's a funny thing about metrics, is that we want to have a unique value proposition. We want to have a unique experience, the best experience for our users. But then we are measuring with the same thing that everyone is measuring. So I can tell you that there are no industry-wide metrics that can help you track changes to your experience. If you're measuring experience, you should be really trying to see what type of game you are playing. So that can give you an idea of what you should be looking at. So for instance, if you're, just give you a measurement, for instance, a high daily active users, monthly active users. If you're Facebook, where this is all over this really high above everyone else, so people are going to Facebook every day and a lot of days throughout the month, you would say that this would be a great thing for your app, right? No, actually it depends. If you're doing a productivity app, if you're doing an app an internal app for your company, you wouldn't want your co-workers, your collaborators to go there every day. So this means that they are going there on the weekends, that they're going there on their holidays. And that's not good for work-life balance. So we should be mindful of these things. And I'm not also sure that if you have a high daily active users, that would be good for an e-commerce site. So there's some other metrics that can be really important, and this can also drive discussion to, I don't know, maybe North Stars and other key PIs. So metrics are really interesting because they have, they can lead us into some traps. We kind of identified 6 types of traps in our research. The first one is a vanity metric that most people, once we start measuring stuff, it's the first things that we are going to pinpoint to have an idea of how successful we are. So imagine that you have an app that was installed by 10,000 people. You're saying, yeah, great, we've done a great job. But that doesn't tell you anything about the product. That's not telling you anything about the experience. For you to be aware of the importance that and to measure the experience that you're doing, you have to be aware of how many people have stopped using it after the first 5 minutes. So it's no good if you have 10K 10,000 people downloading it if 9,000 uninstall it after just open it and close it. Another important thing about metrics, and it's also a trap that we found, is that the numbers are not the experience. And this means that you cannot, the numbers are not telling the whole story. So you might have a conversion, someone might actually finish buying something from you on your e-commerce site, but that doesn't tell you of how long they took of buying it, so just the number alone. So you have to do combine the numbers with usability tests and to understand, do some interviews and measure the experience also. Another thing that we found out about metrics is that sometimes it's the last thing that we placed on our products. Sometimes after we are ready to go into production, someone realizes, well, we have to place a link for a tool to measure how many people are entering our site, or the usage, the engagement that is going to have, because we're not going to know if we're not going to be able to find the box to find out if the cat is alive or dead. So we need to have this mechanism in place in order to measure this. So this is the wrong way of doing things. So remember that idea of the persuasive UX metrics starting with the goal. So that's where you should begin. You shouldn't wait up until you have your production code and you seeing the values to determine why either this is working or not. You should start with an idea, with a goal, and then see if you got it or not. So that's a different way of doing research. So and by starting with questions and by starting of doing research in that sense, we know that sometimes questionnaires and sometimes this way of measuring sentiment that's completely subjective can have some type of bias in it, some sort of response bias. So if you ever filled a remote questionnaire for anything, you know that there's a lot of bias. So you have sometimes people are not understanding. So just on your side, sometimes people might not be understanding what are you meaning with that question. What's your intention with that question? You think that they know what they are answering, but they might have a different idea, or they might think that something else of what you are asking. So that's why most surveys and questionnaires need calibration. They need to be tested. Also, there's a lot of even if they are well calibrated, they are well made. And if you stick up with most of the surveys and the type of ways of measuring sentiment that are up there. So you can measure CSAT, you can measure NPS. So there's a lot of things that can use to measure that. You should take into account also that there are people who are going to fill your questionnaire and they're just going to say yes to everything. They're going to say yes, or they're going to say no to everything. So you need to be aware of this. There's also some social desirability bias. So that's when people are trying to project an idea that's not not the reality, but they're just trying to say something that's socially acceptable. So if you ask someone, how long are you spending on social media every day? They're not going to say 2 hours. They're going to say half an hour about it. So they are going to project a different image of what society thinks that's correct. So there's a lot of bias going on here that you should be mindful. There's another one that's recency, based on we respond based more basically on our recent experiments, our recent experience and memories, not the full experiment. Also, regarding the traps, and this is something that happens and can lead to group discussions that are really difficult to have with your team, is this idea that some numbers and some measurements and some scores come out of perception. So this means that for everyone that's going to look at that measurement, it's going to say something differently. It's going to extrapolate. It's going to be hard to agree on what that is. So someone that's looking at something is going to say it looks red, the other one is going to say it looks blue, or for me it's high, for me it's low. So it depends. It's easier to make decisions based on descriptive measurements and numbers, but you also should be mindful that sometimes these are not completely unequivocal measurements. So sometimes you have hard data, like visits of a site where people are going, and that's pretty much easy to measure. So people are coming into your website, you know if they went or not. But there are also soft measurements, and they can be a number. For instance, the average amount of time that a person is spending on your site. You don't know if that's good or bad. So you can, that's what we call the soft data. And since I'm talking about visits and about all of these things, so you should also be aware that most tools, they do inferences on what a visit is, on what a bounce is. So there's no bounce or visit in HTTP protocol. So you're just making a request to a server. You're just saying to a server, give me these files to my computer so that I can see this information. So that's what's happening. And this idea of visualizations, this idea of bounces, this is based on some and it's different from the services that you are using. So Google Analytics might have something, or other tools that you use, like Pendo, might have other things to work on this. And they change if you're using different tools. And that's the thing that you should try to look at. So these numbers that are coming towards you, they are going to tell you what is happening in your system, but they tell you nothing about why that is happening. And sometimes you might see a dropout out of a funnel of an e-commerce site. Someone is dropping out mid funnel. They are not finishing their purchase, or sometimes they are not even finding a feature that you took so long to develop. So how should you complement this WATS with some usability tests? So if people are not finding the thing that you just developed, you should do an open-ended task, and you should do a usability study, just trying to understand what people are doing, how they are using it, but trying to understand if they are missing that, or if that's not of value to them. But if they are failing mid-task, if they are failing to purchase, for instance, in an e-commerce site, the example that I was talking about, you should do a direct task and see if they are able to fulfill the task, like Paul was sharing. So seeing if they are able to do the transfer. But this doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your product. So keep in mind also that there are context and intention. So if I was, for instance, let's take the example of Amazon. If I was at Amazon, and if I was looking at a website, I might be waiting for an appointment at a doctor, and I was just buying there, but all of a sudden I was called in order to go to my appointment. And I put the phone in my pocket and I forgot about it. Or if I was buying something, waiting for the bus, so I missed that. The context is important. Another thing that's also important, that the numbers tell you nothing of it, is intention. So I might be looking at the same Amazon website, but I might be at Vorten, and I might be just checking out if I can get it cheaper on the other website before I commit to a purchase in the physical world. So intention is also important, and the numbers and the measures tell you nothing of this. It's really funny. So Paulo just talked a little bit about this also. And the thing is that we should measure not only when you have production, our solution or our product in production, our feature in production, but we should measure it early on. This is something that we know as UX practitioners, that we have ways of measuring experience even before we start actually doing something. we can measure the current state. We can see the tool that already exists and try to have some measurements from that. We can measure competition. We can do all sort of these approaches regarding formative and summative all along the way. But what is important is that we look for changes. We look for the things that we are changing regarding the experience of the representative users. So all along the development lifecycle, not just at the end, because at the end we might be too late. We might do that same problem that Paul was talking about, the change failure rate. So this is an example of the output of this lab on all of these ideas. And kind of connecting the UX outcome, the goal at the beginning, and the acceptance criteria at the end, that can be the final metric for the DevOps. As you can see here, so imagine the home banking app as Paulo was sharing. So if we do a great job, the users are going to do the transfer easily. So that's what we are aiming to do. So we know that we've done a great job if all of our users do most of their monthly digital payments with the app. So this is not a precise measurement. We could do them. We could replace most with 80%, 70%, anything above 50, I guess. But measurements should be agreed with all of the team to make sure that we can be more ambitious or less, but it depends on the team how cautious they are. But then we can measure that towards time and towards the usage with how long they are going to spend. So if they are spending 20 seconds of doing a transfer, or if they are spending 2 minutes, and then we can progress if they found 0 errors, or if 80% are going in and they are doing a successful transfer. This means that the next step is going to be the 100%. So we can measure 20%, 50%, and go all the way towards that. Another important thing that we found interesting to have here is to measure subjectivity. So we after a particular, for instance, the third successful task transfer, we can ask, how easy was it for you to send money? And try to collect some sentiment on this. And finally, so the acceptance criteria that we can use, transfer feature that should be a red route in this product definitely should have a 100% completeness on all channels, not just on mobile, but also if you're looking at the desktop, and if you change it to the PWA, well, you're going to have to struggle with that. And that's what we wanted to share with you. So we're open now for some Q&As, and looking forward to answer some of your questions. And so let us think what you think about this.
I guess, Hernan, you can leave it in the previous slide while we talk to you and to Paulo for the questions. We have a few, one of which was related with examples for acceptance criteria, which I believe your previous slides also shown, right?
Paulo needs to be you.
Okay, but I'll proceed with the other questions maybe, or even the previous one. Okay, so people were asking for examples of acceptance criteria in the context of a user story. And this is a very interesting idea, to have acceptance criteria connected to a UX metric. Can you maybe elaborate a bit on that?
So sorry about this, because I'm controlling Paulo's
such a mess.
So you wanted to see examples of how we can connect a UX
metric as acceptance criteria of a user story, which I believe you showed on the previous slide, right?
Yeah, it has to do with let me just try to go back. So usually, if you go into usability, if you go into usability, the things that you can use as a reference is task completeness, time on task. You can use errors for reference. You can have all sorts of measurements for that. You can have 0 errors. You can have I don't know. No one wants to have more than 0 errors in their acceptance criteria. But usually, what we can have is like we can have satisfaction in here. So you can have a CSAT score of satisfaction. You can do a single list question. So that's the thing that we ask, for instance, after a transfer, and you can have an acceptance criteria of everyone that's going to fill this thing here is going to have to say that they liked it a lot or that it was easy. So you can set a threshold of 80% is going to say easy, and then we can improve it. I think that the most important thing regarding this is not the acceptance criteria. I know that it's part of the user story. It's part of about Agile, about how we worked and how we develop things, and to everyone to be mindful of how we are building. But I think that what is important is just to place this on the user side. So it's not to have a acceptance criteria that's based on the development, but based on the user's perspective. So it has to do with how satisfied they are with this thing that we are developing. So trying to connect that, and how easily are they feeling it? Are they completing some feature? And that might not be present on all things that we are developing, on all user stories, but most of them will definitely have to be shifted from perspective to have this UX outcome vision in order to have a better, less chances of making that mistake that Paul was sharing. I don't know, Paul, if you want to complete this answer with something.
No, I think that's very thorough, a very thorough response. There's one question here which I really want to answer to Andres Isabella, where the question is, what can I make in this case? For example, if I need to use in-app browser with Cordova, and then I cannot use this in a browser. So if I translate the web app, the mobile app into a web app, if I'm using this Cordova plugin in my mobile app, it might not work in the browser. And that's exactly the point. This is a great statement of you're changing the scope and the context of the application. And UX is all about context, right? So if you're changing the context, you need to start looking at the business goal changed from having a mobile app that needed to be perfect to the business goal of having transactions being done with the same experience that you have on the mobile app. The business goal is to increase transactions, and the technological path to achieve it, you just went through the easiest one. So just convert. If it works on mobile, it's working on another channel. And that's not always the case. That's why you need to start from the moment you start designing the user story of, I want to convert the mobile app into a progressive web app. You need to have tests running on the new channels. You need to understand what will happen on the new channels. The metrics that Hernani was sharing, for instance, the transfer feature, the completeness on all channels needs to be 100%. The way to test this, I'm not going to say it should be the UX researcher to tell what the test should be. There should be a quality practice in place to say, okay, if we need to test on a web page, we have to do this, this, and that. And this should be an automated test, so it reduces lead time for changes and also, but you need to have the context of changing from mobile to web in perspective. So in fact, your application stops being a mobile application, starts being a multi-channel application. Touch points differ. So yeah, it might not always work. So you might need to adapt. If you want to use the same application on both sides, yeah, you might need to adapt things that were built just for mobile and to think that if I'm reaching out to different channels, I need to actually change things in my code. And this way, you'll prevent change failure rate to increase. And I'd like to, I think I still have 1 minute. There's one thing that I did want to mention. In 2005, there was a study from the IEEE, the Computer Society. It stated that at that time, we're talking about 20 years, 15 years ago, at that time, user experience was not really the thing to go through. You know, if you had one site that was unique, everyone used it, even if the experience was horrible. But at that time, already at that time, 50% of the developers' time was actually bug fixing or making evolutions on the product to fix things that didn't work correctly from the user perspective. So that from that whole amount of time, one quarter of the time could have been cut down if there was, in fact, a connection from the business to the end user experience. And this roughly translated into a developer working 8 days for a change could need only 7 days and spend the 8th day on the beach. So that was, in fact, what happened at the time. And right now, the time that where you need to deliver immediately, when you need to do adaptation for the business in less than 1 day, you have multi-channels, you have user experiences is extremely important for brand recognition, for transactions, for your business as a whole. So this, I'm not sure if, I don't believe there's a metric right now that says 50% of the developer time is done on maintenance and bug fixing. I'm not sure if there's a hard metric to get that, but I'm pretty sure that right now, the user experience influence on the time they spend fixing things, it's way above the one that was in 2005. So this is increasingly important, and it prevents a lot of frustration from the developer side on reworking things that he thought, I did this, it's perfect, and then it failed for some reason that it's out of his control. So rework is one of the major things that cause frustration on the team, and aligning with the business, again, aligning with the business, these metrics, these goals, and measuring them from the beginning is what really will make an impact on your teams and on your product.
Paulo, we have 3 minutes until Manuel starts, and I want to take advantage of those 3 minutes with 2 questions.
Sure.
Partly from the audience and partly picked up from something you said, and this about the involvement of a UX team. Who should be in the team to define and to measure these metrics? Is there a UXer along? Who else is on this conversation about metrics?
Yeah, I guess it will really depend on the dynamics of each team. I don't think there's a strict formula for that. It should be adapted to every different reality. There will be teams, there will be companies with product teams that have huge product design areas, teams where you'll have one UXer for different teams. So it will depend on the dynamics. What I do say is the acceptance criteria, and to define this acceptance criteria, once you start engaging with the customer right from the beginning, once you start, and even if it's an internal customer, for instance, the PM can be the business analysts, they could be internal customers. You need to have someone from the UX, product design, someone related to this area that understands what these metrics mean and how these metrics are, in fact, KPIs for the business goals, right from the bat. If you don't do that, and if you don't have this, nowadays you have cross-function teams, right? There are teams with a developer, operator, security. Why not a UXer right from the beginning? Why not? If it makes sense for your business, if you have a critical, mission-critical B2C app that is used by millions of users, have a lot of UXers there, following every step of the journey, every step of the journey. If you neglect that, yeah, problems. Obviously, you have an internal app scheduled for scheduling vacations on your enterprise. Okay, yeah, the UXer will need to be there from the beginning to understand stuff. But then at some point, it's like, it's good enough. it's good enough. But the very beginning is where it should always be part of the team. The UXer should, or the designer should always be part of the team.
I believe your audience applauses what you.
I was expecting that.
Let
Hear
me
Paul
just
talking about this. Really amazing to hear you talk about this, because you're probably the only person here that's not a UXer.
Oh yeah, I think you like
Yes.
this more than the Schrodinger equation. I could talk a little bit about it, but
No
I guess
more,
that's not
please.
not
No more
important.
cats. It was good though.
Yeah.
Just one last question,
Sure.
really fast. Not sure if for Paulo or Hernani, but it's from David Cruz. Do you have any rule of thumb or tips for cases where different metrics give you conflicting information? Or if they give you opposite results, example, in different markets or different locations?
Yeah, I can try to have a go at that, only because I found the expression rule of thumb really really I don't know if you know where that expression came from. It was from the old days. A judge said that a man could only hit his wife with a board or with a piece of wood if it was the thickness of his thumb. So that's where this expression came from. And that's why I have some issues with that expression. But I can have a go at what you were talking about. It needs to be focused on the discussion shouldn't be just on the numbers. They should be on the change that we want to have on the person's task, on the person's life, that what is happening on the person. So if you have conflicting measurements, and remember that numbers lie, if there's an expression that if you torture data long enough, they will confess to everything you want. So people can manipulate data. They can show you even if you're showing a chart, they can start and mess with the axis of the numbers to let you know that that's a big the big difference. But if you zoom out, you can actually see that that's a tiny thing. So actually, to get you into their agendas and to develop their things. So if you have some conflict data, what you should do, I believe, is that you should look at the experience, and look into your users and use that as a tiebreaker. So you should be mindful of that. Be mindful of your users. Be mindful of the things that they are doing, and try to use that as a way of focusing the discussions, even if someone likes this metric more and the other likes that metric more. And this is not easy. This is complex. Users are all different. So we have to live with this complexity. Even on, you're talking about different geographies, different zones. That happens because people are different, cultures are different. So we need to be aware of that. We need to have our product aware of that, and we need to work around that. But focusing on the users and the difference that's going to happen, and try to see if it works, the things that we are changing. So I don't know if it helps, but.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's a very interesting conversation. To the people that have still unanswered questions, we will review them all in the end of this session and try to give you feedback. So if you're interested, please leave maybe your LinkedIn contact or so we can reach out with the answers. So Hernani, one last thing, or Paulo, I don't know who had exactly. Thank you so much. And now I'm passing on to Sergio, who's going to present Manuel Lima.
Yeah, now we have our special guest today. He is Manuel Lima. He is a well-known speaker and author, design lead mentor at Google. He was also named one of the 50 most creative and influential minds by the Creative magazine. Yeah, right, Manuel?
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
All right, perfect. Let me just start my camera then. Cool. And I'm gonna share my screen now as well. Great. All right, we are set. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, it's looking good. All right. Well, thanks, Sergio, for the kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you here today, even if it's virtually. It seems like it's a great event so far. I loved listening to Hernani and Paulo just now on some of the metrics. I specifically liked some of the comments regarding some of the traps, the common traps when it comes to metrics, because I do have actually a couple of slides on that as well. So let's get started. Today, I really want to talk to you, and I think we have roughly 1 hour, and I'm going to try to leave maybe 15 or 20 minutes in the end for questions. If you have, I always love. It's always the best part for me, the Q&A. So hopefully there's going to be time for that in the end. Today, I want to talk to you about cognitive design and the importance of understanding the human brain for UX. So I don't know what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about design reviews. We certainly are always involved in design reviews in one way or the other. It's probably not this cheesy stock image where everyone is friendly and very smiley at whatever you're saying or whatever you're defending your design solution. It seems many times, more often than not, design reviews kind of feel like a war zone, right? Where you are stuck with having to defend a given design decision. And in a scenario like that, it seems like the worst approach you can probably take is one that resorts to subjective opinions, right? Using things like, I think, I believe, in my opinion, right? I would really stay away from those type of tactics, because they will not get you much further as a designer. So my recommendation for you and for any designer really is to think about always building a defensible rationale, right? For any type of situation where you have to defend a given design solution, think about creating a defensible rationale. So what is a defensible rationale? I like to think of this as like this medieval armor that you put on and like, I'm ready for war, you know, like bring it. But it kind of feels like that, right? You have to really kind of protect yourself and your design solution and make sure it's kind of bulletproof, right? Make sure that it's resistant to any possible attack or question that the audience might ask. So again, how can you do that? Well, there's of course a bit of a toolbox that you can rely on as designers. And this toolbox is really divided in 3 main areas. One of them is customer research, right? UX research. The other one is quantifiable metrics that Hernani and Paulo just went through some of the benefits and as well as the traps. And the last one is cognitive science, which is the one I'm going to spend most time talking to you today. And it's one that not a lot of people actually normally talk about as a means to build this defensible rationale. So customer research, I think I'm talking to a very knowledgeable audience. So you kind of know what it is, right? It's really all about understanding customer needs through observation techniques, through different types of task analysis and feedback methodologies, right? There's of course a myriad of ways. Many books have been written on the various types, methods and approaches you can have from a UX research standpoint. I like to think about these as, you know, the primary ones that you can sort of define, right? So the first one, surveys, and I think also Hernani mentioned questionnaires. It's really the fastest and the cheapest tool for information gathering. It really is. I mean, there's countless tools online today that you can use to build a questionnaire or survey. Because it's so fast and it's so cheap, it's also very easy to get it wrong. So a lot of biases can trickle in when it comes to surveys. So be careful about that. Interviews are really the bedrock of user research. These can either be one-on-one or group sessions. They are the most insightful of all of these in many ways, because you can really get to the nitty-gritty needs and assessment from a specific user. Sometimes you are, and you should actually consider that on a regular basis, leaving the office, right? Or your home or the screen, and actually go and observe users, right? In their natural habitat, in their natural context. I think you can actually get a lot of insights from that process alone. And then finally, personas, right? Building a well-defined list of user segments and respective profiles can really go a long way. Also in building empathy with your users, right? And I'm struck when I see designers jumping into design tools without even understanding who they are designing this for. I think it's almost impossible to do that right. So one is user research, right? The other one is quantifiable metrics, right? It's really all about measuring the effectiveness of any given design outcome through a set of quantitative metrics. Well, again, before we were looking at qualitative aspects and qualitative evaluation, this is really much more about quantifying the effectiveness of any given design solution. And the previous talk just went through some of those metrics, right, for a given product. So I would actually like to focus more on really a word of caution that aligns also to this common traps regarding metrics. So let's go over some of these, right? And again, I put this word of caution here because there's something to say about this modern day eagerness for quantification, right? And this belief that anything can and everything should be measured, including design decisions. So here are a few drawbacks from that belief system. One of them is analysis paralysis, right? This is a common obstruction in decision making due to overanalyzing too many metrics. And this is in part due to information bias. In psychology, they call this information bias the need for more information, even when it just adds noise. It actually doesn't add any signal whatsoever, which commonly leads to analysis paralysis. It's a huge problem, more often than you might actually think in big tech companies. Another great book, if you are keen on this, is called The Paradox of Choice. If you haven't read it, I would encourage you to do so. Then the second sort of caveat for metrics is making a metric a primary target, either for performance evaluation, for business goals, etc. It's really, really dangerous at times. This is a quote from Marilyn Stratton. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, right? And part of the unethical procedures of many tech companies in Silicon Valley are due to this factor, that they normally associate metrics, let's say design metrics, to someone's performance evaluation or the way that they actually get promoted. And regardless of how this metric is actually contributing or benefiting the user, sometimes not even the company at large, and less alone society or the environment, right? There's a great book called The Tyranny of Metrics that I really encourage you to read on this topic as well. And then again, this desire for objective certainty, it's really this elusive myth, right? So a great Portuguese researcher, Antonio Damasio, has showed us that intuition and emotions play a key role in reasoning, okay? So you cannot really make any decision without emotion, without intuition. So all designers out there, trust your gut, trust your intuition, which is really about years of experience in a given field, right? And of course, The Feeling of What Happens by Damasio is a great book if you want to delve into this. And then finally, automation bias. We favor suggestions from automated systems and tend to ignore contradictory data, even if it's correct. This is a bias that we have as humans. And it's a really worrying bias, I think, especially as we navigate towards AI-driven monitoring systems and dashboards and things of that nature, right? It's a really, really worrying bias. And again, take this with a grain of salt when you think about metrics. Another great book is the Glass Cage, where automation is taking us, if you want to really delve into this automation bias process. So we went over user research and metrics briefly, and now I really want to talk to you about this third area, which again, it's not as commonly understood or even debated or showcased in conferences like this. Cognitive science is really about understanding universal cognitive behaviors through well-established principles, biases, and heuristics, right? I love everything. I think design can learn so much from many different areas of cognitive science, and you're going to see a few examples of that. I also, of course, love the idea of a principle. A principle is this general idea or a plan. It's not really a prescriptive or detailed instruction. It will not tell you how to do things step by step. It basically tells you this fundamental quality or attribute on the nature of something. So we're going to explore a few principles on two main areas. One is on how to display and style information. And the other one is how to organize and structure information. And this can be a toolbox that you can use in any design review, any sort of portfolio review that you have in the future, or any situation you have to defend a given design decision that you take. So let's look first at the idea, the area of display in presenting information. So Aristotle was the first one to actually mention that, you know, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Even though we can easily recognize this sentence, it's been with us for many centuries. But it was really Aristotle in the 4th century BC that mentioned this for the first time. And in the beginning of the 20th century, through the work of the Berlin School of Experimental Psychology, this notion, again, that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, really became ingrained in our minds and society at large, in what became known as Gestalt psychology. And Gestalt essentially proved that the operational principle of the human brain is ultimately holistic, or in other words, it is irreducible. It basically, and this is a great testament of their work, was known as the Gestalt effect. And the Gestalt effect tells us that the recognition of shapes and forms is not based on a collection of elements, dots and lines, but on seeing them as a fully identifiable pattern. This is why still today, most humans are able to identify the dog in that picture, while many machines still cannot do the same analysis. And again, this plays to the idea of the holistic nature of the human brain. Gestalt also gave us a lot of really important principles that we can apply on different areas of design. And I'm going to mention a few of them that are absolutely fundamental in thinking about any type of design, specifically UX. The first one is known as the law of similarity. It tells us that elements that are similar are perceived to be more related than elements that are dissimilar, right? So when you look at those three columns on the right, immediately you can understand the duality within each column, right? On the first one, you have big and small circles. The second one, you have gray and blue circles. And then finally, you have circles and triangles. The brain automatically detects and groups the elements that are similar. But then, of course, you can apply this idea of similarity in UI as well. This is actually a project that my team worked on when I was working at Code Academy before Google. And Code Academy is all about learning programming languages, if you don't know the tool. And we actually used, in this case, the color green, right? The law of similarity was applied to color. In this case, we used the color green to indicate progress everywhere across the system. Anywhere the user was within the platform, they would see green and they would associate that green with some type of progress. Here, this is another idea of associating pieces of content with a given color, a color representing a category. So it's a common sort of use within UI of the law of similarity. Then, of course, even the more obvious ones where elements are actually grouped together by their physical similarity, as you can see here in the case for Amazon. So similarity is kind of an obvious principle, but a really important one. One that is really probably the most important is really the law of proximity. And the law of proximity tells us that elements that are close together are perceived to be more related than elements that are further apart, right? So even though you can actually understand here the nuances of, you have this blue triangle and these gray circles, what you actually see are 5 independent groups. And that perception is based on their location, right? By how close things are to each other. This is just a very simple example of how the law of proximity operates in UI. In this case, this is just a mock-up of a simple mobile application. But notice how by proximity alone, and of course you have other visual affordances like the plus and a minus sign, but you tend to associate those 2 buttons and as being controls of some type of an interaction, right? Now, if those buttons were completely separate, like if one was on the top left and one was the top right, you likely wouldn't have the same type of insight, right? You actually be fairly confused. You wouldn't associate the 2, and you associate by proximity, by physical proximity. Now, the law of proximity can go really well or really wrong. This is a wrong case of the law of proximity. This is a tool called Concur. I don't know if you guys use Concur. It's really used on a lot of large corporations. Google, for example, uses Concur. I think Microsoft, when I used to work there, also used Concur. It's basically something that allows you to do expense reports, which is the most boring thing ever. And the tool is even more boring than expense reports. So it's the ultimate thing that no one ever wants to do. But I remember jumping into this tool on Concur, on my first time that I had to do this at Google, typing all the fields, filling all the information that was needed. And then I was left wondering, okay, so what's next? I filled everything, like, what am I supposed to do next? And of course, I completely missed the blue next button that you see on the bottom right of my screen. And I completely missed. It actually took me quite some time to understand where would I click to move forward, right? And of course, the law of proximity can also go wrong in real life. This is an example of the law of proximity going very wrong. Okay, so I love to show this example because it's, again, people really understand how critical this is. Now, all of a sudden, instead of no smoking, safety first, you are reading no safety, smoking first. And that happens, again, only because of proximity, nothing else. And notice how someone maybe tried to remediate this situation by painting them in different colors. So no smoking is actually painted red. But again, it doesn't matter. You could use fonts, you could use color. The law of proximity surpasses every other law. It doesn't really matter if you try to associate by other means, by color, by shape, etc. Law of proximity is paramount in this case. A more recent example that I actually discovered on Twitter was this one. I don't think it's as obvious as the other one, but you kind of notice it because, again, the spacing is not quite right. And then instead of "you matter, don't give up," you read "you don't matter, give up," which is horrible. It's the opposite effect, right? And again, it's just based on a poor understanding of this important Gestalt law. Now, what can we do to solve this? There's many other ways, of course, but quick things that you quick fixes that you could do there. One of them is another Gestalt law, which is called uniform connectedness. And of course, designers love this, even if they don't even know this name exists, or even they are not even familiar with this law per se, but they use this all the time. This law tells us that elements that are connected by uniform visual properties are perceived to be more related than elements that are not connected. What does this mean? It means that this has been a principle applied to UI forever, since the early days of Windows, where you have all these features, all this functionality, and they basically group things together by literally creating a box around those items, right? And that box alone creates the perception that these things are related. Okay, so here, this is a quick example of how that can be applied. On the left side, you have two columns of very disparate and different items, right? So now all of a sudden, just by creating lines around them, instead of two columns of diverse items, you have 3 rows, right? Fully identifiable. And now the only thing I'm doing here is literally putting lines around these things. So this is, of course, a principle that designers know too hard, even if they're not familiar with this principle per se. And this is also why designers love boxes or cards so much, right? You can see this everywhere. So on the daily deals on eBay, as you can see on the left side of my screen, you can see how now all of a sudden you have all these completely disparate items, you know, from a bookshelf to sunglasses and a camera. They are grouped together in the same box, and as daily deals, like another visual affordance, all of a sudden you understand these are somehow connected. You don't really understand how, but because they are in the same container, they are connected. And of course, a quick example on properties, this idea of a property card, that you basically collect a bunch of metadata on a specific property all in the same card, again, creating this illusion that everything is connected. Another great principle in this area of displaying and presenting information is oro vacui. I absolutely love this principle for UI. Oro vacui it's really a tendency that all of us have to a certain degree to favor filling blank spaces with objects and elements over leaving spaces blank or empty. All of us have been there, right? You probably bought a new bookshelf to your apartment, your house, and it looks great. It's like empty, it's so clean, so minimalistic, and then all of a sudden, you know, in a month, it's like already filled with crap that you don't even know you had, right? So the interesting thing about oro vacui is it's very prevalent even across the globe. But what's really interesting about this principle is that there's a general inverse relationship between oro vacui and value perception. What does that mean? As oro vacui increases, as our tendency of filling spaces with things increases, the perceived value and prestige of that thing, that experience, tends to decrease, right? You can think of this as an example in New York City. If you would go to Chinatown, right, you normally have a window of a shop filled with stuff, right? It's absolutely like hard to even pick one. And immediately the perception that you have is that, wow, you know, it's cheap stuff, right? It's not very expensive. On the opposite side, if you go up a few streets, a few avenues, all the way to Fifth Avenue, it's the opposite. You might have 1 or 2 items on display. And the perception is completely the opposite, right? You all of a sudden, you think about this experience as more expensive, more sophisticated, and so on. So how does that apply to UI? Well, in a very similar vein, when you look at UI like this, you know, this is an old page from Yahoo, very busy, kind of everything is screaming for attention. You know, there's really not a lot of sense of priority or hierarchy. You tend to feel that this is kind of like a cheap, like a portal type of experience, which is not great. In opposition, again, and I promise this is going to be the only Google image I will show you. You look at this, and the perception again is somehow similar to the Fifth Avenue example, right? It's because it's so clean. There's only a few items on display. If you perceive it as being more modern, right, more sophisticated, simpler to use. So finally, our last principle on the area of display is the aesthetic usability effect. And this is to the liking, I'm sure, of all designers on the call today. This important principle tells us that aesthetic designs are perceived as easier to use than less aesthetic designs. Even if they are not as usable, they are perceived to be more usable. It's kind of like a similar bias that exists even in people. You know, people, there's another bias that we tend to associate talent with beauty, right, in people. And there's numerous biases of that, which could well explain why we tend to associate, again, aesthetic designs as being easier to use, even if they are not. But again, perception matters tremendously. More so, we actually tend to be more forgiving of beautiful objects than less aesthetic designs, right? And this is probably, you don't maybe throw a MacBook, maybe because of the price tag as well, but you don't throw a MacBook every so often outside of the window of your apartment. But you know, those old school laptops that were so crappy, like you might, because you get so angry with it. And it's also ugly, right? It doesn't help at all in any front. But I love this principle again, because, and I, you know, when I'm talking to engineers and explaining the value of this principle is when you invest in quality, when you invest in craftsmanship, this can actually determine the amount of bugs and complaints you will get from users. Simply because, again, people are more forgiving when the experience works, when things are aesthetically pleasing. And of course, many great companies have explored the aesthetic usability principle, from Nike to, of course, Apple and many more. This is a common practice, and those that have done it well have certainly collected the fruits of their labor. And as Donald Norman would say, attractive things just work better. Again, even if it's just a matter of perception, it doesn't matter, they just work better. So we went through a few principles on understanding really the human brain when it comes to the ways we should present and style information. Now we're going to look at some ways that we can prioritize and structure information, right? Organizing data. The first one on this list is the 80-20 rule. I think it's also a very, very important rule and principle for designers. Basically, the 80-20 rule is also known as the Pareto's principle. It is applied to a variety of fields that you can think of, from economics. It actually came from the Italian economist Pareto. It's applied to various fields. You can just look it up, 80-20 rule. And it basically tells us that a high percentage of effects in any large system tends to be caused by a low percentage of variables. Okay, so how does that apply to UX or UI? In the following way: 80%, roughly 80% of a product's usage involves 20% of its features. Okay, think about that, 20%. These are the most important features you should be caring about, you should be embracing, okay? This goes back to the early days of Word software, right? In this case, the things that are actually exposed by default, right? The font, the saving, the printing, those were the 20%. Those are the things that people care the most and use the most. The rest is hidden between, you know, between a variety of different pull downs, okay? That's the 80-20 rule in principle. And again, another example is, there's countless I could show you, of course, but this is an example of the old Gmail interface. And notice how compose is the most prominent. That's the 20%, right? That's the key feature. It's size-wise, color-wise, position-wise, highly prominent, right? You couldn't miss it, even if you tried. And then there's some of the more secondary functionality is hidden within a series of pull downs, from settings to more, etc. Or even, you know, most mobile interfaces, of course, especially in the early days, took advantage of this principle and still do, right? Normally the 4 or 5 little icons that you have on the bottom of a mobile app, those are likely to be the 20%. And then everything else goes under this burger menu, which has taken a lot of beating, but I actually think it could work okay when used correctly. So my only thing would be in this case, like, think about your 20%. It's really important that you identify those 20% features as early on as possible, because that should really be a focus about prioritizing and making those work very smoothly for the user. Now, the other principle, it's actually very related to analysis paralysis, as I briefly mentioned in my quick introduction on metrics. It's called X law. And X law basically tells us that the time it takes to make a decision increases as the number of alternatives increases. I absolutely love this principle because it's almost like the conundrum of modern day society. You know, we in the Western world, we like to think about this great set of democracies that we have created. We have this sense of freedom, and freedom comes by the abundance of choices that we have every single day, from buying a pillow to buying mustard to buying a new TV. We have so many options to choose from. We are so amazing, right? But that actually comes with a really, really expensive price that we don't realize immediately. And that price is anxiety. We are also in the Western world very anxious people, and becoming more so, especially now with COVID and the imminent failing of many democracies, unfortunately, or the parent failing of democracies at the moment. But all this anxiety happens. Well, I mean, all of you have probably faced this. You know, when you go to a supermarket, I certainly have, and I just want to buy mustard, and all of a sudden there's like, especially, you know, I lived in the US for well, more than 10 years. I still do. I'm kind of like in between transitions now in Lisbon. But if you go to a supermarket there, it's kind of crazy the amount of flavors and types and things that they have for really everything. You know, you want to buy ketchup, and there's like ketchup with a flavor of something. But then the thing is, you take so much longer to make that choice because you have so many options. All of a sudden, wow, this looks pretty good. You know, I didn't even know I liked. Maybe that's pretty good as well. So like all of a sudden, it takes like 5 to 10 minutes just to pick some ketchup or some mustard or any other product like that, right? So this is also known, of course, as the paradox of choice, which is, again, the book that I recommended before. And I absolutely love this quote by Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard that says, anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. I absolutely love this because it expresses so well this conundrum of modern day society that we are, again, obsessed about having this freedom of choice, but it comes with a price of anxiety. And this is actually a saying we have at Google. It's kind of like a saying we use all the time when thinking about features, thinking about where or what we should be prioritizing. And the saying goes like this: when everything is important, nothing is important. Okay, so when you are part of a team and your PM wants to make something more prominent, and someone else wants to make another feature more prominent, all of a sudden you have like 20 different things screaming for attention. And you have a lot of problems, more problems that you actually have solutions for. This is, of course, just one example of Hicks' law. There's countless. This is just bad UI overall, right? Bad prioritization, bad categorization, like bad everything. But again, like a lot of the feeling you have when you are faced with interfaces like this, or like really long questionnaires that people don't prioritize, is anxiety. You actually feel anxious because you don't even know where to start. You don't know what's next. You feel frightened about the amount of things that you have to fill or you have to go through. It's a frightening experience, which is the last thing you want to create for any user, really. So, of course, there's many ways you could fight Hicks' law. There's many approaches. One of them is progressive disclosure, which is another really important principle for interaction design. And progressive disclosure is really a strategy for managing information complexity in which only necessary or requested information is displayed at any given time. And we see the use of progressive disclosure in a variety of cases. You know, in mobile phones, they do that. In mobile apps, they do that all the time. In, you know, sort of introductory wizards to an experience, they kind of go step by step processes, which allow, again, us to consume information in a much easier way and in a slow-paced manner as well. This is an example of many I could show. This, of course, is Duolingo. I don't know how many of you have played with Duolingo. It's a great tool to learn a new language, not a programming language, a real spoken language, written language, a language, I should say. And then, and again, instead of like just bombarding you with all this information, all of a sudden, they understand that you have to learn in a progressive fashion. And as you get more comfortable, then they unclose, they unlock other levels, which is, again, another principle when it comes to game mechanics and and game development as well. As you get more comfortable, you slowly progress forward. You become, you go from beginner to moderate to advanced, right? But this implicit is this idea of progressive disclosure, right? They've instead of bombarding you with everything all at once, they slowly, progressively show you more and more relevant information. It's a great tool to manage complexity. Also, by the way, very commonly applied in data visualization. And talking about data visualization, this is actually a mantra that is known as the information visualization mantra, but I love it so much, and I actually think it can easily be applied to UX and UI as well. And the saying goes like this: overview first, zoom in filter, details on demand, right? It's really all about this idea of progressively displaying information. So you start off with overview, you see where everything is, then you start to sort of going deep into the experience, you start zooming in filter, and then you have more details on demand, right? So when a user asks for more information, that's when you should give it, not all at once. Another one in this principle is called the serial position effect. I like this one because you can also apply in many other realities in your life, and of course in many of the design projects that you work on. The serial position effect tells us about this phenomenon in memory in which items presented at the beginning and end of a list are more likely to be recalled than items in the middle of the list. And this is really this notion of it's called the primacy effect and the recency effect, right? Primacy effect being the things that you see first, you tend to retain them and recall them better. And also the things that you see last, right? This is also called the recency bias, right? So let's say, this is another kind of a separate example. Let's say that you are thinking about evaluating someone's performance over the past year, right? And the recency bias can come by, instead of looking at the 12 months of performance for that person, you tend to give a lot more weight to the last 30 days. Primarily because it's more recent in your memory. So you give it a lot more emphasis, but this is what it's called the recency bias, okay? And this also happens to memory, right? The recency effect. And of course, this happens in many different ways. When you go to a restaurant, by the way, this always happens with me. So whoever is creating menus, I'm the target user by far. So notice how they are very smart about choosing what goes in the first area of the menu at the top and the last. At least the menus that are really well designed can really leverage that principle, okay? So when you are waiting for your turn, everyone in the table has ordered their food and drinks, and now all eyes are on you to make that decision, and you are absolutely unsure what to choose, you tend to use either the recency bias or the primacy effect, right? You will go for the first thing that called your attention or the very last thing that you read. Okay, so this is just an example. And of course, Amazon and many other e-commerce sites really leverage this principle, right? They really prioritize everything that's on top of that list. And you can think about a list as a long scrolling page, right? Which is a list in its own right. And of course, the things on the top, right, above the fold are really the most critical information. It's basically all the primary things you could do in that page are located above the fold in the beginning of that list. But also in this case, I don't show the end, but of course, all designers know the footer, for example, has become such a powerful tool for engagement, right? And it's the same principle, right? It's at the top of the page and the very bottom of the page. So this is the principle in action. Now, it's interesting how it doesn't happen only vertically as a scroll or as a list. It also happens horizontally. So this is a great experiment that they have done to test the behavior of people buying online. And what they did here is that they actually have all these 4 tabs in a row. They are very similar in number of features and types of things that they offer, but they keep on replacing the first item. They basically kind of spin, right? Like every so often they switch the item that's actually on position number 1. And the crazy thing is that always consistently the first item, irrespectively of the tent, got 2.5 times more clicks. Okay, 2.55 more clicks. Even if when it was a red, it didn't matter. It always got more clicks. So again, what people see first matters tremendously from a memory and an engagement standpoint. So think about even things that are static, not things that people can click on, but even just displaying information, the things that you prioritize, that you actually show first, are probably the things that people will retain at a later stage. And as this quote tells so well, there's no expedient to which a man will not resort to avoid the real labor of thinking. So this is very much why this principle happens with us humans. It's because we will try to avoid the real labor of thinking anytime we can, always, consistently. So finally, this is really my last principle for you today, and it's also my absolute favorite. It says so much about so many things. This is called the flexibility usability trade-off. It's a really, really tough trade-off to get right. It basically tells us that as the flexibility of a system increases, the usability of that system tends to decrease. So what does that mean? So think about a TV remote back in the days, back in the 80s, let's say. So imagine that remote, like the one you have on the left side. So from a flexibility standpoint, it was lousy. I mean, you couldn't really do that much, right? But you can only just turn it off and on, change the channel and change the volume. That was pretty much it. Now, from a usability standpoint, it was tremendous. I mean, you couldn't really get it wrong, right? It was so simple to use. Now, think about the modern day remote that some of you, hopefully not too many of you, have at your homes, or even in hotel rooms when we used to go to hotels, not anymore. Think about that experience, that remote that you see, right? It's the opposite, right? Again, from a flexibility standpoint, oh my God, I mean, you could do everything. You could probably turn on your lights, your microwave, anything you can think of from a flexibility. But from a usability now, you have a lot of challenges, right? So this is just, what the hell is going on here? Like, seriously, you need a book to understand you need a manual to understand this. But notice how resourceful designers have been over time by applying different shapes, different sizes to the buttons, different orientation, different colors. There's a myriad of design options that are very intentional here. But because of its flexibility, it's just chaotic. It's just so hard from a usability standpoint, right? So again, really high flexibility, really poor usability, okay? So this is really a system that you can think about the logic of organizations, the logic of companies, the strategy of many products. You can argue that, I certainly think that way, that one of the downfalls of Nokia, and I used to work in Nokia back in the day when it was still big and large before the iPhone. One of the things that Nokia fell down, one of the reasons was that it was about this principle. They invested so much in flexibility, those phones could do so much stuff. And they forgot, again, to focus on the 80-20 rule, right? And on usability as well. So this is a really important principle that hopefully will stay with you for some time. And I think Hernani before mentioned biases. This is actually my favorite Wikipedia, believe it or not. It's my favorite. I know it's a little bit geeky, but it's actually my favorite Wikipedia. It's called The List of Cognitive Biases. You should read it. I mean, it's absolutely a delight. If you really want to understand your own brain, your own biases, and biases that many of us and all humans actually share, this is the page to go. And this is also ties back to human universals, which is something that I have become really fascinated lately, which is, the qualities that, due to our shared evolutionary history, characterize humans across the globe. I absolutely love this idea of human universals, which biases are really tuned to. So that was really my talk for all of you today. I really thank you for the invite. It was really a pleasure. You can follow me on Twitter, MS-Lima, if you haven't done before. You can also follow me on crowdcast.io/MS-Lima. I'm gonna be doing a bunch of webinars and videos and interviews and things of that nature. So if you are interested, you can also follow me on Crowdcast as well. So I think now we have maybe just a bit more over than 10 minutes for Q&A, which is great.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Manuel. I assume that from that Wikipedia list, you also did your 80/20, right?
Yes, for sure. It is.
I'm going to suggest that we start doing this differently now. We had a raised, we don't have anymore. We had raised hands. So if you want to make your question live, that would be also very interesting to pose your question instead of us reading them. But we do have Paulo Fonseca. I'm going to allow you to pose your question live. Hi, Paulo.
Hello, does this work? Hi. So, Manuel, I was wondering, and it's kind of a biased question, but bear with me for a while,
Sure.
about the 80/20 rule that you mentioned and prioritizing the design work on the 20% of features that users will use the most. Would you say that the order by which we design the features of a product influences the final quality of the design? Like, for example, in an e-commerce website, maybe the product page or the listing page is the one that's going to be most used and not the home page. But commonly, the designer would probably start by the home page, right? So should we think about where should we start designing first?
I think there's probably a correlation there. I would say, especially in the beginning of building a product, right? You know, the first things you build probably will have more attention. But I think in the long term, as you start adding more things to the product, that correlation will not be as strong, right? As probably in the early days, I would say. Because with more features, with more capability, users will tend to pick the things that are of more interest to them, I would say. So I think there's an interesting observation that certainly, yeah, probably there is that's now exactly where that threshold happens, you know, in the middle of the life cycle of the product. It's an interesting insight. I'm not quite sure when exactly that happens, and there's probably a threat. I mean, even the 80/20 rule, of course, only applies to products of a given dimension, I would say, of a given complexity. Okay, so I don't think it applies to really simple products that have, you know, a couple of pages or a couple of features. That doesn't really make sense, you know. So if you are overseeing or thinking about a product as that simple, 80/20 rule probably doesn't quite apply as equally. It's more a tool to manage complexity, right, and organize a fairly complex type of a product, of a hierarchy, I would say, when it comes to features.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paulo. Let's go with a written question this time, and it's from Aurelia, and asking, how does Orvacui apply across cultures?
Wow, yeah.
Yes, across Asia have shown me that spaces, stores, streets, signs are really filled up. Could tolerances differ in various communities?
They do. It's one of those things. Like, I think the debate is between not so much if there's an implicit bias, but it's kind of like you read best what you read the most, right? There's also that element. Basically, are people, just the fact that they are more exposed to this type of treatment when it comes to information, you know, in this case, more information, they associate that with better, with prestige. Could that actually change things? And from a perception standpoint, that's probably the case, right? But still, the difficulty in interpretation, right? Some of the things that are associated with Orvacui will probably persist at a universal basis. It's more the associated perception of prestige or some other associated values that each culture probably varies from culture to culture, I would say.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I guess I think you did. And about that, okay, so there's a remote control that these days is filled up with buttons, right? And
Sure.
see it and we think, well, it sure allows for a million different things to be done. and at the same time, that's our vacui. Are these contradictory in some way? Can we get some product manager or project manager arguing about no, I don't want any blank spaces. It doesn't convey that we have a lot of features. So I want the features visible.
Well, I mean, again, that's more. I mean, again, like the examples that I was mentioning in this case, when Orovacui ceases existing, or what I mean is like simpler interfaces are actually meant to be perceived as more sophisticated, more premium, more careful, right? There's this implicit association with craftsmanship that you actually took some time to pick the things that matter to me, right? So this idea that we again have to fill things with information, it's actually the opposite. It goes back to the paradox of choice, to Hick's law, to analysis paralysis. Like, more information is not always good. In many ways, it actually is bad. It's worse for making decisions, and a lot of times the interfaces that we are building are meant to empower users with quick, easy, and educated decisions, right? And if we are hurting them in that process by showing too much information, it becomes noise, right? It becomes distractions. And that's a huge problem, right? That we have to think. So, but that debate will always exist because, we always work in big companies and we have to please, whoever we have to please. In the case that we have a partnering with a team that wants that feature in this section of the app or the website or whatever we are building, right? And all of a sudden they have the right to have it there because it's more premium, because users will listen. So it's a really tough battle to play, but ultimately you have to think about the user last. Again, you should not think about pleasing whoever you have to please on your company, because ultimately the user experience will suffer from that lack of structure,
And what kind of arguments should a designer use in that scenario? Is that data, interview?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was the whole.
Right?
Yeah, so it's a mix, right? It's being smart. It's building that defensible rationale, right? It should never be based on opinions, right? Like, I think this, right? As I started off this presentation, it's a mix. It's knowing which card you should play, which card being other user research, right? Like, hey, I actually spoke to customers, real paying customers who felt this way about this specific prototype that we put together. Sometimes it's metrics. Sometimes it could even be competitor analysis, saying, hey, you know what? Our competitors are not even close to doing that, or no other competitors doing that. Why are we pursuing this specific approach, right? And sometimes it is cognitive principles. Like, these principles, many of them that I showed, of course, one or two examples, but there are countless. This has been proven and tested countless times, and these are things that anyone can use as a card, right? As, hey, you know what? And actually, this is kind of a dream for me and my team, for people to stand up in the design review and say, hey, you know what? I love this design, but this actually contradicts principle number XYZ, or principle, or Vacui, or, they start using this in their language, right? I think it's a more informative type of discussion, that designers empower themselves with this type of knowledge and this type of lingo as well, as part of when it comes to evaluating a design decision.
Yeah, for sure. João Cunha, he asks for tips for approaches to your team, design, development, and business on explaining and showing the benefits of cognitive science.
Oh, on explaining the benefits of, well, I would say this: you are designing ultimately for humans. Okay, so there's the benefit there. Like, you are designing for humans, and humans have brains. So it's in your own personal interest to understand how the human brain works, right? To understand many of the biases we have. Some of them are, again, more culturally relevant. Others are truly universal. Some of the behaviors we have, some of the tendencies that we share, right? So it's in your own interest to know as much about the human brain as possible. And to be honest, I think it's a huge blind spot for designers still today. And it's not partially, of course, their fault. It's really, well, two things. One is a lot of the research on cognitive science is still very academic oriented, still, you know, behind paywalls in colleges across the world. And there's also a huge lack of knowledge or willingness to teach these type of things in design schools today. Like I certainly didn't have any class on psychology or cognitive design applied to design, or cognitive science applied to design. I think I would have loved it to be able to have a class like that. And I still think many designers go off into the market without having a single class or even reading a book about cognitive science, you know, the areas of perception and memory and things of that nature. And again, I think it's a huge blind spot because we are designing for humans.
Yeah, and it's interesting that at least I've been seeing when hiring to the team that many people doing UX are not necessarily coming from design schools.
Yeah.
They come from psychology, neuroscience, journalism, other areas. Very interesting. And sometimes they're more connected to the parts of user research and a lot high levels of empathy to know the place of the other. It's very interesting, and I think our profession really gets enriched by different people from different backgrounds, right?
I totally agree. Yeah, especially on user research. Yeah, I've had some really interesting discussions over the years with, you know, user researchers that come from that background, that have studied and researched deeply academic stuff about some of the things that I briefly mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, we still have a couple of questions.
Sure.
We have Karan Patel. He asks, how does one decide how much flexibility to add or provide, especially when you also consider for disability and accessibility mismatches in products?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's really tough. I mean, there's no perfect formula. Again, this is like a trade-off. I think it's important at least that we are aware that that trade-off exists, right? Now, what is the right trade-off? It's almost, there's no magic formula. It really depends on a variety of factors, you know, from your own product, the type of features that you have, the goal of the product, the type of user audience that you have. It depends really on multiple factors. But I think it's like striking that balance between again, flexibility and usability, which is hard. And a lot of times is by give and take in some of those discussions, right? It's conceding at times, you know, choosing your battles. You know, that's something that I certainly learned from my career, is like, you cannot win every argument, you cannot win everything. So it's picking the ones that are really worth fighting for, right? And I know I like to use a lot of these battle metaphors, but it's not always a war, but I like using those metaphors because people can relate to those things. But yeah, I think it's really tough. It's really tough to actually find that sort of the line between. But understanding that trade-off is the first.
Okay, thank you. And Miroslav asks, what is your favorite cognitive bias in respect to UI?
Wow, there's so many. It's asking like, who's your first favorite kid, right? That you had. No, it's really hard. I think even though I love the flexibility usability trade-off, I really think X law, you know, the whole paradox of choice is really interesting. And I think it's interesting because you can extrapolate that and apply that not just to design, but, you know, again, like just going into a supermarket. And, you know, just recently I had to buy, what did I have to buy? I had to buy a pillow. It took me like a month to buy a pillow because like there were so many options, you know, like I didn't even know like you could get pillows with like feathers, you could get pillows that are like with this, you know, gel that adapts to everything. Like now there's like so many things, so many options to choose from, which is great. But in a way, it's like I become anxious. Like I just want a pillow, you know, and all of a sudden I have to spend a month researching all the pillows that are in the market, and like not, it's just, you know, and again, it's a conundrum because we like to think of ourselves as you know, right now having that freedom of choice, but sometimes I wish I would go into a supermarket as maybe our parents did, or even our grandparents, you know, and you had like one single brand and that was it. And I bet I would spend much less time in a supermarket, which I hate spending time there, because I would just buy one thing of each category that I needed, and that was it. There was nothing that would, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't have to.
I'm imagining one of these days you go into a supermarket and there's a shelf and there's two types of ketchup, and there's a button saying you want more or you want different, and then you click, you get more. So progressive disclosure.
Yeah, maybe it's like you have only one brand and then you click and it opens a window of choices.
Why not?
Why not? I mean, that's actually a good idea. That's a great idea. And then you can even research how many people even bothered to click on that and open the other choices. Maybe that's the 80-20 rule. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last question. How can a designer defend their designs even when they have the right data and rationale against a relatively aggressive stakeholder who actually has a contradictory view?
Ooh. That sounds like a war right there, right? Yeah. That sounds like a battleground. Wait, so, well, I mean, again, I think in cases like that, the best is always to not get personal, right? So bring the focus back to the problem you're trying to solve, right? So if that person is being very argumentatively fighting for their own opinions, I think that whoever is in the room will eventually notice how inconvenient that person is becoming, and should not be the approach, right? If it comes to that, I think you need to bring back the discussion to what you are there to solve, right? This is the problem we're trying to solve. This is the history. Maybe there was like a few options before, and this is why it's the best one, and we have data to back it up, or any type of evidence that you have. You can use some of the cards. Now, if you still are fighting with reluctance, I mean, I think that's really the burden is on that person to actually explain why exactly your solution is not the right one for the task, right? But again, I would avoid making this about the person itself, and really, again, focus on the thing you're trying to solve, on the problem that you're trying to unravel.
Yeah, well, and I think there's no more questions. It's up to me to close the session. Thank you so much to the three of you, amazing speakers today. Thank you to the hosts, co-hosts. Yeah. This was really fun. Thank you to our sponsors, to OutSystems that also supported us along the way. And we will share the recording in the website, okay, in our website. So go there in a couple of days, but we'll also send you a thank you email with the link for it. So hopefully see you guys all next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.